In the last video, we introduced some synchronous action creators. Now I want to take advantage of them to handle asynchronous code. And to handle asynchronous code, we need to add a special middleware to our Redux project, a third-party library we can add called Redux Func. Here I'm on the GitHub page. Simply Google for Redux Func, written like this, to find it. Here you can find more instructions on that. Generally, this is a library which, as I just said, adds a middleware to your project which allows your actions to not, or your action creators to be precise, to not return the action itself, but return a function which will eventually dispatch an action. With this little trick, not returning the action itself, but a function which will then dispatch one, we can run asynchronous code, because the eventually dispatch one part is the part which may run asynchronously. It'll become clearer once we add it. So to add it, let's pause or let's quit npm start and let's install a new package with npm install -- save. The name is redux-func, written like that. Now with this will get downloaded and stored as always, and we can then register it as a middleware to our project. Detailed instructions can always be found on the GitHub page, of course. There you see that after installing it, in the end, we just added with apply middleware. So let's go back into our index.js file where we create the store and add middleware. And there, I'll now import this new package. So I'll import something from Redux Func. And that something can be found on their page. They actually have a default export, so we don't need curly braces. We can give it any name we want. I'll stick to func, but you can rename this to whatever you want. This package essentially just exports the middleware. Now this already is a middleware, so behind the scenes, it'll look like our custom middleware, a couple of nested function calls, and therefore we can add it. Now here in apply middleware, I'll add it after the logger, func. So that object we just imported, or that function to be precise. So this is the middleware added. With that, we can go back to our action creators in the actions.js file. And let's say in store result, we actually want to execute set timeout. And only after 2 seconds we want to store the result. So here in this function which gets executed, somehow in there, we want to return this action after 2 seconds to simulate that we previously or prior to this action reached out to a server to store it there and only update our state once this was successful, for example. Now with that, with the current setup here, this won't work. But with the func middleware added, what we can do is we can change this return statement here, and I'll put it right in front of set timeout. We'll clean up the rest here soon. So I will add a new return statement actually, which will return a function, and that's important. Now you can again use the function keyword. This function receives dispatch as an argument, the dispatch action. Now we get dispatch in here due to Redux Func. I said that middleware runs between the dispatching of an action and the point of time the action reaches the reducer. Now the thing we do here is we still dispatch an action, but then Redux Func, the middleware, comes in, steps in, has access to the action in there, basically blocks the old action, we could say, and dispatches it again in the future. Now the new action will reach the reducer, but in between, Redux Func is able to wait because it can dispatch an action whenever it wants. This is the asynchronous part, and that is exactly allowing us to execute some asynchronous code inside of this function. And of course, we can also use good old ES6 arrow syntax here, like this. So the code inside of this dispatch function here is executed. And now inside of set timeout, inside of this function passed to set timeout, we can execute dispatch to now dispatch whichever action we want to dispatch. Now, of course, we would create an infinite loop if we again dispatch store result here, our action creator. So what we typically do is we create asynchronous action creators which in the end dispatch actions created by synchronous ones. So what I'll do is, I'll quickly create a new action creator and export it. I'll name it save result. This will now still be the action creator as we had it before, receiving the result, and there returning the action we used previously with type store result. So that is my synchronous action creator. In store result, however, I will now dispatch exactly that save result action creator, which returns me this action, which actually updates the state in the store, because it is the action of the type we handle in the reducer. Now, before we see that in action, which should make the flow clearer, there's one thing we have to keep in mind. Here in store result, where we return this function, which will get executed by Redux func and where we have set timeout, when we then dispatch the action which should run synchronously and update the store, we need to execute save result, which is this action creator, as a function, of course, and pass res on, so that we do pass the payload to the store. With that, make sure to save all files, including the counter.js file, and then let's restart npm start to see if this works and to also see the flow of events in our Redux DevTools. So the app loaded. We can now still manipulate our counter, but if I click store result here, you see that it took 2 seconds to actually print store result. Now that's the interesting thing. You never saw this other action creator with the set timeout inside of it lead to any output. If I click store result, nothing happens immediately. Only after 2 seconds we see store result. So only the action dispatched in there after 2 seconds leaves a footprint, because it's our synchronous action and only synchronous actions may edit the store. The other action creators like store result, which run some asynchronous code, are only possible due to Redux func and are caught in between. They never make it to the reducer. We only use them as a utility step in between to run our asynchronous code, which happens to be required to run on a lot of actions, and then dispatch the synchronous action to change the state in the store once we are certain that we know what to do there. So once our asynchronous code finished. This is why we see it here. In the console, interesting enough, where we have our logger middleware, if I clear that, you see that we got more output because the logger logs everything which reaches the action funnel, and that includes our function which is returned by the asynchronous action. We never added the state here though, because that gets blocked by Redux func. So this is how we can work with action creators to handle asynchronous code in our Redux store.